Okay. Welcome to the DRGN SLYR Podcast by East Idaho Credit Union. Today's guest, the CEO of East Idaho Credit Union, Dan Thurman. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Woo! Good to be here.
Well, it's super fun to have you here. This is an interesting kind of podcast because we cover a couple of different topics, and they're all related to some cool experiences that you've had. We called it DRGN SLYR because we really wanted it to be about, businesses and business leaders overcoming difficult obstacles in their path to growing their businesses. And I've worked for you for just over a year, and we've had lots of conversations about your tenure.
Probably feels like 10.
I'm currently aging at about 7 years a year right now, so that's been nice. I don't have many gray hairs.
It'll come.
But I've got more than I did when I started a year ago.
If you're like me, you'll lose the hair before it turns gray. So.
We were actually talking about a contest in a senior team meeting, and one of the suggestions was, we could shave your head if you lose the contest. And Dan was like, I got to hold on to what I've still got here.
I'm afraid it wouldn't come back. I have to hold on to the little bit I do have. I don't
Is that going to be the entire senior team, that contest?
That was the proposal.
Dang, that's not fair to the women.
It's off the table.
Yeah, Dan vetoed that idea. Yeah. It wasn't my suggestion. I would just like to let that be known. But I was willing. I'd shave these beautiful locks if it came to it for the greater good, right? So Dan, what I want to do is I want to go through kind of your background and your history. You've been with the credit union for a long time, basically your whole career. You had a couple odd jobs like in college and then this. Yeah. So tell us first, how did you get to the credit union? How did this happen to you?
How did I end up at the credit union? It's an interesting story because I was going to school at ISU, and I was headed back to Montana. I'm from Montana originally. And in between semesters before I'd been married, I was working at an assisted living home up in Montana. And I loved working with those older patients, guests, residents. I guess we'd call them residents. And I knew the family. They were friends of my family. And in fact, I graduated from high school with their daughter. And I was going to go back and buy that business. And that was my goal. And as I was going through school, I was working at Albertsons in Shelley. It's Brolam's now, but it was Albertsons at the time. And they started cutting my hours back. And I had a young family. I had a young son. And I was worried that I was going to lose my insurance benefits. And so I started looking for a job just to get me through the end of school. And I applied for a loan officer position at East Idaho Credit Union. I thought it was the East Idaho Credit Union right next to the Albertsons in Shelley. And I went in for an interview, and the interview was not here at Hammond, but at the main office on Woodruff. And I interviewed with Cindy Mitchell, a legend at the credit union.
A legend.
She'd been at the credit union for a long, long time, and was the branch manager. And so I interviewed with her and learned that it was a loan officer position at the main office. I was fortunate enough to get that position as a loan officer. It's interesting because knowing Cindy the way I know Cindy now, she didn't hire college students because she didn't want to work around their schedule. She didn't want to deal with that, right? So she just didn't hire college students. And not only did she hire me as a college student, but she worked around my school schedule. And I had like 6 months left of school.
Did you ever ask her, why did you take a chance on me when this is sort of against your normal procedure?
I do, but I don't remember what she said. You'd have to ask her that question.
Okay.
And so I started out as a loan officer, still intent on going back to Montana. And we were far enough along in the transaction with the assisted living home. They were sharing tax returns, full open disclosure of everything. I knew where things were at. It was moving along. And I got a phone call from them one day, and they said, "We have some bad news." And I said, "Okay, what's the bad news?" And they said, "We can't sell it to you right now. The bank won't let us." They were going to finance it for me personally. I wasn't going to get a loan. They were just going to finance it for me. I'd pay them directly and pay it off, and it was a sweet deal. And but they still owed some money on it, and the bank wouldn't let them sell it to me with them owing money on it. And as a loan officer, said, "Oh, that makes sense. I understand." I loved what I was doing as a loan officer. I said, "Perfect. How long do you have left?" And they said, "We can probably have it paid off in a year." And so I said, "Great. I'll keep working, doing what I'm doing." And so I stayed at the credit union. In that year time frame, there was a position that opened up at Maine for an assistant branch manager. I applied for that, got the position. And it was a couple months after that, they called me back and they said, "Okay, we're ready." And that's when my family and I had a hard decision to make. My wife's from Bear Lake, Montpelier area in Idaho. I'm from Montana. And we were right in between both families, and we kind of liked what we were doing. There's a lot of opportunity with being self-employed, but there's pros and cons with both. And so we're
ton of risk to it, too.
A lot of risk, yeah. And ultimately, for me, one of the big driving factors was the credit union had benefits, they had insurance, they had all that type of security, retirement. There's a lot of opportunity with being self-employed, but I chose to stay at the credit union. And another factor that played into that, there was a vice president of lending. So remember, I started out as a loan officer, and I love loans, love lending. There was a vice president of lending. He was a little bit older, another legend of the credit union, Doug Stone. And I thought maybe someday I could be Doug Stone. And so I just received the promotion to be an assistant manager. I could see a little bit of a career path that potentially I could be Doug Stone someday. And the security of the credit union, the benefits, just the work environment as a whole, I decided to stay, and the rest is kind of history. Yeah.
Well, we're going to get to the rest of the history in a minute, but have you ever looked back on that moment, that pivotal moment where you made the decision of, is it the credit union or is it this assisted living facility, and thought, man, what could have been there? Did I make a mistake? Have you ever had that moment?
I look at it and you see and you hear headlines about all the regulations and the changes in the healthcare industry. And not that financial institutions are without regulation. We're very highly regulated. But man, I'm glad I made the choice I made.
And so that would have taken you and your family back to Montana. Is that in Dillon? Is that where is that? That's where you're from, Dillon.
Yeah. So my dad was born and raised in Blackfoot. He moved up to Montana. My mom is raised in Montana, Dillon, a Dillon girl. So just 2 hours north of Idaho Falls, and we spent a lot of time in Idaho. My grandparents on my dad's side were down here, aunts, uncles. Most of my cousins were here. On my mom's side, I have one set of cousins, or one uncle, and his kids are we're down in California. So we didn't see them as often. So most of my cousins, most of my family time was down here in Idaho. So we spent a lot of time down here.
Yeah. You're I mean, maybe you weren't born here, but you're as Idaho as anybody I know, I think, to be totally honest. Okay, so...
You hear a lot of politicians talk about, I'm fourth generation Idaho, and fifth generation Idaho. And I look at Idaho, and I look at my roots in Idaho, and I always ask, well, can I claim that I'm a fifth generation Idahoan, even though I was born in Montana? But truly, Idaho is my home.
Yeah. It's funny. Dan and I have met with a bunch of politicians of the state, and he's right. They lead with like, oh yeah, I'm fourth generation, I'm fifth generation. I think one person even said I'm an eighth generation Idahoan, and I was trying to work out in my head how that was possible.
They were in Idaho before Idaho was Idaho.
I think they were old mountain men or something like that. Yeah, fur trappers. Yeah. Okay, so you make the decision to stay. You're a loan officer. Now there's a number of years between that and CEO. Tell us about that path.
At East Idaho Credit Union, we're a full-service business lending center. We can help with all of your needs, from a small startup all the way to a large enterprise and everything in between. Our commercial loan officers will work with you to understand your business and to help get you to the next level. Come check us out at eastidahocu.org/business.
Okay, so you make the decision to stay. You're a loan officer. Now there's a number of years between that and CEO. Tell us about that path.
Yeah. So I started out as a loan officer at the main office, and that was great. I loved loans. I've always thought in numbers, and I've always been really good with money, fascinated with money, interest, having money work for you instead of against you. And so loan officer was really cool because I got to add some tools to my arsenal, learn some things that I didn't know about before, apply things that I learned in college, and then really help members do the same thing, help them improve their lives, help them save money, help them package things in a way that would be beneficial for them long term. So I loved it. My heart's always been in lending. And then as an assistant manager, I supervised the teller line. And I had never been a teller before. I started out as a loan officer. A lot of our employees start out as tellers and work their way up. I started out as a loan officer. And so
I actually think teller is, that's got to be like the scariest and most difficult job in the credit union,
I thought if I was supervising tellers, I needed to understand what they did. I needed to be a teller.
And so, reasonable. Yeah.
So I pulled a cash drawer. We didn't have recyclers back then. The tellers use now. Or most of our tellers use now. And so I pulled a teller drawer and I learned to be a teller. And I remember every night those tellers, they'd hold their breath as I was trying to balance out, right? And I was never off. I never had, well, I won't say I was never off. There was never an outage that I didn't find, right? Yeah. And so, but they held their breath. I made it through. But it gave me a good foundation understanding of what they did on the job.
Yeah.
And how they interact with our members and the pressures that they feel. And so I appreciated that experience.
So I want to ask you about this just a little bit more because this is a scenario a lot of business leaders end up getting themselves into, what you just described, right? You're now over this department or you started your own company and you've got these departments and these functions that you don't necessarily have a level of expertise in. You think about like a guy who starts his own company and he's highly creative, maybe he's a great salesman, but now he's got to deal with accounting, right? And he's not an accountant, he doesn't have any training in that, doesn't know what he's doing. Or now he's trying to do marketing and he doesn't have any training in that. What would you recommend to somebody who is in a position where they've got to wear a hat that they're not used to wearing and they've got to figure out how to develop a level of maybe not even expertise, but they just got to be dangerous? How do you get there?
Yeah, you just got to be humble and ask and get in and dig in and learn. And a lot of times people think that they're above something, right? Like, I'm the manager. I'm not going to sweep the floors. I'm not going to pick up the garbage. I'm not going to do whatever. And you shouldn't ever be above anything. Like, if you expect an employee to do it, you should be willing to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And being humble enough to go and say, look, I don't know. Can you teach me? Can you help me understand? And it builds trust between you and your team, right? And so the tellers taught me a ton. And working with them directly, I was able to teach them a lot. And then we had a better relationship, and I was able to help them make referrals back to the loan side a little bit easier. And so I think it was a good experience on both ends.
Yeah. One of the things that I've always recommended to people, and I think you make the great point, like you got to be humble about this stuff, right? The expertise may not be in the building, and that's okay because it exists somewhere. Go find it. Go make friends. Go expand your network. Go work with people. Go take people to lunch that do know what they're doing, that do know what they're talking about. It's one of the easiest ways to get like expert level advice for almost nothing, right?
Yeah.
To just be a friend and develop your network, and that's something that you can call on frequently and as much as you really need to, and get you like really, really good insights into a topic that you just don't have familiarity with.
As I look back at my time at the credit union, when I first started out, I was at the main office, and the advantage there, it was back before we did a lot of video meetings and things like that.
Yeah.
So the advantage of being at the main office was if I had a question, I'd go upstairs. I'd talk to the chief lending officer. I'd talk to the chief operations officer. I'd talk to the CEO. I'd talk to whoever. And so I found myself early on in my career, I would learn my job and I'd try and learn it well and do a good job with it. And then I'd try and learn other people's jobs.
Yeah.
And I'd ask a lot of questions, and I had access to more resources because people were just there. And I think that accelerated my career.
Yeah. One of the pieces of advice I always give to people is, your competitors are not your enemies, right? Make them your friends. Like if you're friends with your competitors and you go to lunch with them and you sit down and you talk to them, you get to compare notes, and the tide raises all ships at that point. And it's something that I see a lot of people make mistakes on, is they'll look at the competitor across the street and say, that's the enemy, we got to destroy them. And yeah, you're going to do that too, right? Right. But the reality is there's usually enough pie for everybody to have a slice, right? And you can work together to get bigger slices for both of you.
One of my best friends in the credit union industry is a competitor.
Yeah.
Ken Thurman at Idaho Central.
Yeah,
Credit Union.
of course. Yeah.
He just announced his retirement, and he's been a mentor of mine and a friend, a true friend. And I sent him a text and I said, man, I'm so glad our paths have crossed. I'm proud to call you my friend. And he sent a really nice text back. And, there's a lot of credit union leaders, a lot of business leaders, financial institution leaders that'll push others away because they're successful. And I've found that, if you embrace other leaders and are friends with them, you can help them, they can help you. And I'll never forget when COVID first hit, and it was all unknown, and we didn't know how to deal with it. And Idaho Central is massive, right? They're a lot bigger than us.
Yeah.
And so they'd been dealing with it a little bit longer than we had. They'd had a little bit more experience with it. And we had an employee a group of employees that tested positive at one of our branches. And I'd heard Kent Orem at Idaho Central say that they had this fog machine that could sanitize a building. And because of that friendship we had, I reached out and I just said, hey, Kent, is there any way that I could borrow or use your fogging machine? And he says, even better, tell me where and when, and I'll send my guy and my crew there. And so they came in and they fogged our building for us and got us set up. And we brought a new team in the next morning to open the branch and not miss a beat to be able to serve our members.
Yeah.
And not only did they fog it, but then they shared with us what the equipment was and how to use it and where they bought it. And we got our own setup. And, we're competitors, but we're there for each other as well.
What a classy move by Kent to do something like that. I love that. Okay, so you're assistant manager. You just learned how to be a teller. What next?
So in 2008, the credit union was building a new branch. We hadn't built a branch forever, and we built a new branch in Ammon. And in this building.
This is it, right here.
Is it.
Yeah.
And so we opened this branch in 2008, and I applied to be the manager and was fortunate and got selected to be the manager. So I came out here in 2008 and hired the team. We had about half of the team that we started with came from within the organization. Half the team came from outside the organization. Alicia Jones, another legend of the credit union, she started out here, not started, but she came out to Ammon with me, was my assistant manager, and we kicked things off, and man, it was a blast. It was so fun to create a brand new team and open a new branch, do some things that hadn't been done in the credit union before. We kind of took the first steps into cross-selling and tracking those types of things, and we created our own homegrown Excel spreadsheet with the team on how to track cross-sells, and we did a lot of training on that.
Yeah, it sounds like 2008. Yeah.
And so that was kind of the first glimpse of that for the credit union.
Yeah.
And we must have done something right because that branch was super successful. I remember between Alicia and I, there were months that we were closing almost $2 million a month in loans out of this branch, and we were opening accounts left and right, and teller transactions were going well. We had lines out the door, and good times.
Yeah,
a lot of fun.
Okay, so I want to ask you, the big elephant there is 2008, huge economic downturn that the whole world was experiencing. You're a new branch manager of a financial institution, right? There was no bigger target on anybody than financial institutions. What was that experience like, living through that financial crisis at a financial institution?
I was probably young and naive, and I just didn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
And so it didn't faze me. I just did my job. I just did a lot of my career, the things that I've done are things that I wish I would have had. So I think back and I'm like, man, what do I wish I would have had as a loan officer, as a teller, as a whatever, right? What support do I wish I would have had from my executive leadership team? And so in 2008, my leadership team was pretty supportive. I could do what I needed to do. They gave me pretty much full reins to, within reason, to do things, try things. And so
that's my favorite response. By the way, that's my favorite response Dan gives me when I ask about some crazy idea. Like, what do you think about this? And he's like, yeah, as long as it's, within reason.
Within reason.
Within reason. That qualifies everything. Right? So, we just went to work and tried to start implementing some of those things that we wanted, that Alicia and I wanted, that the team wanted, and that made sense to us. And we found something that worked. And we started working with some dealers, an RV dealer here in town, and they would send us an application over. We'd approve them, send back an approval, and they'd send the member over, and we'd meet with that member and then find on their credit report another truck or car loan or credit card, and we knew that we could save them money. And so we'd do the RV loan and a truck loan and a car loan and a credit card and move their accounts over, and we just had a ton of success, and it was just a blast.
The same era, I was working at a little technology company, and we were growing and things were going well, and then that downturn started to hit, and we had a line of credit through a big national bank, and they pulled our line of credit, and we basically couldn't pay anybody. We couldn't do anything. And a group of us kind of got together, and we're all like, what are we going to do? Maybe this is it.
Should have gone to a credit union.
Should have gone to a credit union. You're probably right, actually.
More sympathetic.
You know what we actually did? We actually ended up leaving that bank, and we didn't go to a credit union, but we did go to a small local bank that was much easier to work with, and ultimately probably saved that business. But we got together, and we were like, well, what do we do? And a lot of us elected to stay at the company, not take a salary, and just try to ride the thing out. And
they just paid you in food?
You know what they actually paid us in was equity in the company.
Okay.
That's what they paid us in. And so they were my paycheck was equity in the company, which only goes so far for a company that's not worth anything, right? But that ended up going really well. But one of the things that we decided as a group is we were like, we know that there's an economic downturn, but we're just not going to participate in it, right? We're just going to keep going, head down, and we grew through the entire recession. And that company ended up being, really big and really successful down the line. And had we not made some of those decisions, it gave us this scar tissue where we were like, we're not worried about outside forces nearly as much as a lot of other people were, because we'd lived through this experience of saying, no, we're not going to participate in that. We're just going to keep going. Yeah. And it changed that organization in a major, major way. But
that's kind of like our experience at the Ammon branch in 2008. The leadership wasn't telling us that these things were affecting us, and we just didn't know. We were naive. We just
didn't care.
And did.
Didn't care. Yeah. Well, and I think, man, your leadership probably got it right.
Yeah.
They got to probably spend sleepless nights worrying about it.
But they worry about it. Let us execute.
And they let you get to work. I love it. Yeah, that's great. Okay.
I'm over here trying to relate. I was a freshman in high school. I'm like...
Sometimes I'll be like, guys, do you remember in 1992 when this thing happened? And they're like, we weren't born yet when that happened. So, okay, so you lived through that whole experience. You're a branch manager. What happens next? What's the next stop in our timeline?
Yeah, so remember earlier I said there was a legend named Doug Stone.
Yeah.
The VP of lending, and Doug retired. And I was so excited that I had an opportunity to be VP of lending. And so I waited a little while, and the credit union didn't post a VP of lending position, but they kind of split it up, and they posted a AVP of lending and an AVP of ops position. So I applied for the AVP of lending, and a little while later I got a phone call from the executive vice president, and he said, Dan, would you be interested in the AVP of ops position as well? And I hadn't really thought of it, but I said, sure, I guess, you know. So they scheduled an interview. I went in for the interview, and
So real quick, Dan, for people who don't know, who aren't from our industry, what's the difference in those two positions? AVP of lending, AVP of ops.
so lending deals with all things loans, obviously, and then operations is all things operations, the branches, I don't know at the time that ops had. They didn't. In fact, now our ops team has cards and ACH and all the electronic stuff, the mobile app. But at the time, it was mainly the branches. So that was the difference. So they scheduled the interview. I went in for the interview, and they'd ask a question, and I'd answered about lending, because that's what I wanted. Right? I want to be Doug Stone, the man, the myth, the legend, and. So I'd answer the question about lending, and they'd say, "Well, what about ops?" And so then I would throw something out there, and they'd ask another question. I'd answer about loans, and that's how the interview went, back and forth. And a couple days after the interview, I got a phone call, and they offered me the AVP of ops position. And I thought, "Were you not listening?" You know? And so it kind of caused me to pause for a minute, and I didn't say yes immediately. I had to think about it. But I loved what I did at the Ammon branch, and the ops position would allow me to work with all of our branch managers. We had 10 branches at the time. And so I took a day or two, thought about it, and ultimately accepted the position. And so then I started supervising our 10 branches and started taking some of the things that we did at Ammon, the things that we'd been trying and experimenting with, and started working with the other branches to see how those things fit there.
Yeah. When you took some of the models that you had tried at Ammon and tried to bring it to the other branches, how did that go?
It depended on the on the branch and on the manager and on the team, right? And all of them were different. But the fact of the matter remained that what we'd been doing in Ammon was successful. Like I go to managers meetings on a monthly basis when I was the branch manager at Ammon, and they'd review numbers and productivity, and there was a clear difference, right? Our branch was outperforming probably the rest of the branches combined, and so while there was some hesitation, some resistance at times, like they understood there was something that was working there.
It's interesting how, and I've watched it throughout my career, people will see it and they'll be like, yeah, it's working, but they won't make the connection from it's working to maybe I should do it too. Which I think is more of a kind of an evaluation of human beings more than anything else, right? We're resistant to ideas that aren't our own, even if they're good ideas. It's actually a really consistent issue that anybody, especially starting like a small company, or running your own company of any kind, they get to experience that, right?
And some of those managers have been with the credit union forever.
Well, in 30 years,
Cindy,
what does this kid know?
Cindy was my boss. She's the one that hired me, right? Now I'm her boss, and so
that's always a strange
there's always
dynamic
different dynamics there. But and I also tried really hard to go in and build on what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were doing wonderful things as well.
Yeah, of course.
So you take that and add some new tools, some new programs, and I think that makes it a little more palatable too.
I have a friend who he started a consulting company, and 30 years of expertise. He's one of the best in the country at what he does. And people would hire him to come in and consult. And he'd say, okay, exactly what you talked about. You're doing this well. Here's the things that I would adjust and change. And they'd pay him a bunch of money for him to say that to them. And then they'd say, no, we don't want to do that. It's an interesting thing. Yeah, change is very difficult.
I think one of the things that helped those managers the most was, remember the question that I asked earlier, what would I want as a manager that I wasn't getting? And so those were kind of the things that I tried to pull into the Ammon branch.
Yeah.
Well, now all of a sudden I'm going out to them and saying, hey, what would you like? Here's some information that I used at the Ammon branch, and starting to be able to provide that on an organization-wide level. That was easy for them to accept.
Yeah.
To have the data, to have the information.
Yeah. Okay, so AVP of Ops, never wanted it, ended up there anyway, right? what happens next?
So there was an interesting transition at the credit union.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The AVP of lending came in from a competitor and was going to, save the credit union on the lending side, and that didn't really pan out. And there were a lot of ripples there, a lot of division, and your raisins going stale and your phone's ringing.
They're all laughing at me that my phone just buzzed. Let me see. Was that actually me?
Yes, it was.
My vibrate's off.
Well,
it's not.
It can still go off.
How?
We heard it back here.
I mean, I heard it too.
That happens to me all the time.
You know where it came from? Right there.
Whose phone is that? That's Andrea's.
That is not.
Oh,
Ed, this is your fault.
dang.
That's easy.
Ed's responsible for all this beautiful lighting. He gets a pass.
Yeah, he gets a pass. on that. That buzzed. And Zach is like,
I thought it was me. I'm holding my phone and I still look for it on the table.
That's amazing.
it's every episode, Dan. This seems to happen. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Please continue.
I don't remember where we were. I think it was it AVP of Ops?
The transition.
Yes. So they brought in the new AVP of lending. He was going to save the world.
She was going to save
She
the world.
was going to save the world.
And the transition the credit union. So AVP of lending comes in. She's going to save the credit union.
Yeah.
Things didn't pan out that way. She had a good job, but she was, how would I describe her?
How would you describe her?
Kind of like a bull in a china cabinet.
Okay.
Just,
Yeah, just run over people
Yeah.
a little bit. Yeah.
And so at the time there was a lot of divisiveness in the credit union, and I was fairly new on that leadership team.
To your
I
role.
started working with that senior leadership team, and I remember we had an exam, and I walked out of that exit interview with the examiners thinking, whoa, what's going on? And just some basic organization stuff. I tried to, one of the things that was kind of a cleanup issue was some policies. And so I went to try and find some of these policies, and one was on a jump drive, and one was on an actual hard drive on someone's personal computer, and one was in a paper printout on a file in a file folder.
One was on a floppy disk.
Yeah, they were just all over. It wasn't organized, so we had to tackle that. So I started working on some of those things to get some of that exam stuff cleaned up.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, explain what one of these exams is, because this is a big deal.
So an exam is basically a distraction of your life for a 2 to 3 week period.
I hope the Department of Finance isn't listening right now. But
I would tell them the same thing. So a distraction of your life for 2 to 3 weeks, and then however long it takes you to work through any findings or cleanup from it, right?
yeah.
Is it
But-
once a year?
It depends.
Yeah.
And so they come in, and their goal is to make sure that financial institutions in Idaho are operating in a safe and sound manner, right?
Yep.
And so it's not a bad thing, but it does distract you from what you're trying to do on a business perspective. So you have to stop, and you have to work with examiners, and you have to clean things up, and it's all good. It's just a distraction, right?
Yeah, our
and it's all
interactions-
things that need to happen. It's not bad.
Yeah.
And the department has changed a lot over the years as well. I feel like they're much more of a partner now. Like they still hold us accountable, and we still have to do. But man, sometimes in the past it was my way or the highway. An examiner would get on his or her interpretation of a statute or a reg, and it could be interpreted 50 different ways. But his way or her way is the right way, and there's no budging from that. And now I think they're doing a much better job of listening and trying to understand different points of view and trying to find a path forward no matter what. So that's the exam process.
They seem a lot more consultative than maybe they used to be. Yeah.
And the exams will happen anywhere from, well, right now, once you reach a certain size, they'll be a yearly, no matter what.
Yeah.
But right now for us, they can be up to 18 months before the next exam. But if there's issues, if there's concerns, it can be shorter. So, there's institutions that'll get an exam every 6 months. Or there's institutions that an examiner will just pop in unannounced.
Surprise!
That's scary.
Every month or so, right?
Right.
So there's different levels, but if we're doing well, then and everything's sound and they have confidence in the team and what's going on, it can be up to 18 months.
Yep.
Right now, can I knock on this?
You
Vibrate? Right now we're up to 18 months
Yeah.
in between exams, and we have been for a while.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that we always, and I've only lived through the one that we've had here, and very positive. The examiners are very complimentary of all the work that we're doing, and have just a ton of confidence in what we're doing too, which is nice. Okay, so going backwards in time for a minute, you have an exam, and it's maybe didn't go great.
well, and I didn't know what to compare it to, right? So I didn't know if this is how all exams are. I just didn't know, right? It felt like it probably wasn't what all exams would be, but I didn't know,
Hopefully,
right? And so we went to work, and again, naive, inexperienced, young. I didn't know any better, so I just went to work and put my head down and started doing what I could to clean things up. And so I did a lot of work there. At the same time, there was some changes that were happening in the credit union. Our CEO retired, longtime CEO. He had led the organization for a long time. And so that was hard. That was challenging for the organization. There was an EVP that applied for the CEO position. I also threw my hat in the ring. I knew I was young. I felt like I didn't probably have enough experience to be the CEO. But I knew the other executive that had applied, and I liked him. I thought, I can do that too. And so I threw my hat in the ring. And I remember after that interview, so the difference, it's not like you're interviewing with the CEO to be the CEO.
Right.
There's a board. We have a 7-person board. They're all volunteers.
Yep.
And so I interviewed with that group, that panel of 7 board members, and I think they even had
They're
outside,
the CEO's boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an outside consultant that was on that panel tour that was helping the board through that process. So it was 7 plus this outside consultant and their team. And so I interviewed, and I remember afterwards, a board member or two came up and said, "Wow, we didn't know, we're
We thought you were an
impressed."
idiot this whole time. Yeah.
Not that I was an idiot, but they didn't. I wasn't on their radar, right?
Right,
They didn't know.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what happened is they hired another executive, Brad Bogus. He came in from outside. He came in from the Oregon, Washington area. But they told me, they said, work with Brad, learn more, go to Western CUNA Management School. It's kind of like an MBA for credit union employees. Go get that done. It's a 3-year program. Learn from Brad, work with Brad, build this team back up and get ready for an opportunity in the future.
Yeah.
And so I did that. I went to Western CUNA Management School, 3 years, 2 weeks a year for 3 years, and 2 massive projects in between each session. And by massive projects, like 500-page projects that you put together. And
I've read through some of yours. I've read through some of your old projects from that. And I wouldn't want to do it.
And it was a lot of work. And Brad came in and exceptional experience. Great leader, really helped transform a lot of what was going on and focus on culture and on systems and the right people. And so we started working together, building the team, and that was a lot of fun too. It felt like so at the time we're $250 million in assets. So it felt like we were creating a new credit union, but we got to start with 30,000 members and $250 million in assets. And so a unique opportunity, and a lot of work too. The credit union hadn't filed a 990 report for a couple years or for some time, and lost the tax exempt status. And so we had to work on getting that back and cleaning that up. And So there was just a lot of cleanup, a lot of, really rebuilding systems and processes and the organization as a whole. And
So I think this is an important moment in credit union history, actually a really, really important moment, because I don't want to say things like went off the rails. I think that's an overstatement, but things were not being done probably super, super well in the credit union. There were some cultural issues in the credit union, and you and Brad kind of worked together in a lot of ways to help change some of that stuff. This is a situation that's not uncommon in a lot of businesses where things, the culture gets sideways on them, where things get hard. And what did you guys do to address primarily the cultural piece?
Brad was a great leader from that perspective,
Yeah.
and he expected you to treat people right, no matter what level of organization. And I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Right. But to have him come in with the experience he had and to live that and enforce that, I'll never forget just an amazing example of this from Brad. So I come back from Western CUNA Management School, and we'd hired a new CFO, and he was also at Western CUNA Management School a year ahead of me. And we come back after 2 weeks out of the office down there doing credit union stuff, and he just graduated from Western CUNA Management School, and come back into the office, first day back into the office, and Brad pulls me aside and says, "Hey, just so you know, this individual's no longer with us." And I was shocked. And what it boils down to is, if you didn't treat people the way that you were expected to treat people, like, you can't change culture if you say this and act a different way, right? And
Right.
that was out of alignment, and that didn't fly.
Yeah.
And so a change was made.
Yeah.
And that speaks volumes
Yeah.
to how culture changed at our organization.
Yeah. That's quite the commitment to making sure that you're taking care of the organization as a whole, to say, we love you, but you don't fit. That's a really hard conversation to have in a really, really painful moment. But that's ultimately, that's what a CEO has to do, right? They have to make the hard calls that are right for the organization. Yeah. Wow. What else did you guys do? What else did you guys work on to try and shift things at the credit union?
Well, we were in the process of, systems.
Yeah.
Upgrading systems. We were pretty behind on technology,
Yeah.
on mobile apps, digital, all that type of stuff. So a lot of focus on systems. We converted core systems, lending systems, statement processors, pretty much everything. There was
must have
either
been
on the
awful.
docket, and that's a distraction as well, right? Because you're trying to focus on all this other stuff, and then you have all this conversion work that you have to do, and a lot of work to make sure that the conversion goes right. And then even as much work as you put in, there's always little things after the conversion that you have to clean up and do and fix. And so a lot of work on systems, a lot of work on people and culture, getting the right people in the right seats, treating people the right way, setting those expectations.
I want to ask you about this because we've talked for a minute about sometimes people are wrong, and then we've talked about getting people in the right seats. Can you go into some more detail about how you might, for somebody running their own business, like what kind of advice would you give them on making sure people are in their right seats, or making sure people are on the right bus altogether?
Yeah, it's hard because no matter what decision you make, someone's going to be upset.
Yeah.
Right. And that's hard. And that's one piece of being a leader that you have to get whole with, that there's going to be a group or a set of individuals that is not happy.
Yeah.
No matter what decision you make, whether it's here, or right down the middle, left, right, or down the middle, there's always going to be someone unhappy with you. And so if you're a people pleaser, if you're so focused on everyone has to be happy for me to be happy, for me to be successful, you're just going to flounder. It's not going to
Leadership's not your thing.
It's not going to go well. And so getting whole with that, and then truly trying to make decisions that are best for the organization. And I'm not an expert at that. It's hard. It's hard to make those massive changes that affect people's lives, even though it's right. I would say the more experience I have, the better I get with it. But it's hard. Yeah. And it's something that you learn as you go. Sometimes you need a little push to get there. But ultimately, whenever a change is made, it's for the best of the organization. And I truly believe that those individuals that are affected in that change, in the end, they're in a better place as well. It's going to be better off for everyone in the long run.
I think that's true too. I've always said that it's also unfair to the individual to keep them in some role where they can't be successful.
Yep.
They're not happy either, right? Yeah. And there are certainly some kind ways and empathetic ways that you can help somebody to find a spot that makes a lot more sense for them, that they actually can be successful. And to me, that's actual kindness, right? Okay, so, all right, so you and Brad, you're doing your thing. What happens next?
So Brad had a track record of staying in organizations about 3 to 4 years, and that held true at East Idaho as well. So Brad moved on, went to another credit union, and the board posted the CEO position again. So this is about 4 years after Brad had been in the organization, 3 or 4 years. And this time I applied, but this time I applied feeling more confident.
Sure.
I'd completed Western CUNA Management School. I had learned a ton. I felt prepared. I felt ready.
Yeah.
I don't think you ever feel ready, right? But I felt more confident and ready to go through that process. And so this was an interesting one because I applied and Chris Cardwell, our CFO, applied. And Chris and I, we got along great. Chris he's an amazing individual, very intelligent, great leader. And I thought, man, Chris would be a great CEO. But I also had that desire, right? And so, but
I could be a better one.
And we were friends, and so I honestly, I would have been fine either way.
Yeah.
I personally, I wanted to lead the organization.
Sure, probably more fine if you got the job.
Yeah. But honestly, if Chris would have been the CEO, I would have
too.
supported Chris 100%.
Yeah.
And so I went into that interview and answered the questions, did my thing, and probably the thing for me, Chris was towards the end of his career and he had 3 or 4 years left, I can't remember, and I'd seen that, right, as you go through a leadership change, even if it's internal, even if it's whatever, it disrupts things. People feel uneasy. There's some uncomfortableness in that change, right?
Yeah. Even when it's a natural progression, it's still hard.
Yeah. And so Chris had 3 or 4 years left, and that was one of the things that I mentioned to the board is Chris will do a great job, but if there's a change again in 3 or 4 years, that just creates some uncertainty, some uneasiness among the team. I don't know if that's what swayed the board one way or another. Hopefully it was beyond that, and it was because of my leadership qualities and that stuff. But ultimately the board, at the time I was serving as the interim CEO, so CEO leaves and the board put me in as the interim CEO.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything, this is what helped the board with their decision. So as I was the interim CEO, that's an interesting time as well, right? Because
it's got to be so weird.
Because you're the leader, but you're not really the leader. You're not the permanent leader. And so there were things that I wanted to change. Brad had made a couple of adjustments before he left that I didn't necessarily agree with, some positions and titles and whatnot. And there were some things I wanted to change, but I didn't know if I wanted to, so I went to some of the board members. I'm like, how much do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Because in my mind, this makes sense.
Yeah.
I should
want me to keep it
be
running?
doing this, but I don't want to make these changes if the new CEO is going to come in and do something entirely different.
Right.
And they, to their credit, they said, do what needs to be done. Run the credit union. We put you in as interim CEO to do that job. So change it. If you think it needs to be changed, change it. And so I made some adjustments. So I think that more than anything helped the board understand that I wasn't afraid to lead, that I could lead, even in an interim scenario. And so I was interim for a little while and had some opportunity to make some adjustments, some changes. It's almost like they were giving me a trial run, right?
Yeah.
and then I go through the interview process and they ended up selecting me. So that was pretty cool.
How intimidating was it going from having like one boss to having 7? Like,
That's the piece that not many people understand, right? The CEO has 7 bosses. None of them work here at the credit union. They're all volunteers, and they all work in different industries.
Yeah.
And that's difficult, right? Because having one boss is sometimes difficult if you don't see eye to eye or if they have something, right? But to have 7 and entirely different personalities, and we try and have diversity on our board, right? So different backgrounds, different geographic regions, male, female, whatever.
Yeah.
And so then you have this this range of opinions that you're trying, and all of them are your boss. So that is a challenge.
East Idaho Credit Union offers business accounts that will fit your needs. We have dividend earning checking accounts and high yield savings accounts, like our brand new Velocity Money Market that earns up to 2%. Check us out at eastidahocu.org/business.
Okay, so you've just gotten the job as a CEO. You've lived through a lot in your last 5-ish years of being a CEO, a lot of stuff, right? There's the transition, there's COVID, there's all this stuff. There's the expansion of the organization. Tell us about, I almost feel like this is where the story really begins. Tell us about your experiences as a CEO over the last 5 years, some of those big moments.
So probably the first thing, right after I became CEO, we won Best Place to Work in Idaho for all industries our size in Idaho, not just financial institutions, but everyone. And that was big. That was huge. And that's when really I first recognized, one of the first times that I recognized that our culture was something special, that we're doing something right. Culture's never perfect. We always have to continue to work on it, but we're doing something good.
Yeah.
So that was fun. That was cool. And then over the last 5 years, we've won it 3 of the last 5 years. So pretty consistent. In the 2 years that we didn't win, we placed second. So that's cool. And then COVID hits. COVID was crazy. You've all lived through it. It was nuts, and you didn't know from time to time what was going to be next. And I remember meeting with the senior team, thinking, okay, we have some time to prepare for this, and we're going to start making some plans to transition people home. And then the next day we met and sent everyone home, just like that, just boom, gone. And then the whole dynamic around COVID. We were supposed to have a 2-week, everyone stay home for 2 weeks,
Right.
flatten the curve, which drug on for years, and it was so politicized. And trying to make decisions on COVID for the safety of our employees, for the safety of our members, how we interact with our members, how we're still able to provide that level of support. And no matter what decision you make, there's people upset with you. And so trying to do what's best for the organization, for employees, for their families, for their members, that was challenging. Trying to find that balance. Ultimately, I feel like we did a pretty good job with COVID. We kept our branches open. We closed our branch lobbies for that required 2-week time frame. Kept our drive-throughs open. Outside of that, we didn't have any major closures or outages longer than half a day. If we had an outbreak here or there, and we'd go in, fog the branch, and send another team in so we could still provide support to those members. I remember hearing stories of some of our credit union friends in Oregon and Washington that 2 years in, their lobbies are still closed. Members can't meet with employees face to face, and I think we did a good job in Idaho of balancing that and still being careful, being cautious, but providing service to
Yeah.
members while they needed it. So COVID was big. It's still there, but we've moved past COVID, and our take now is it's the same as any other scenario. If you're sick, stay home. We don't
Yeah.
want it, but we don't specifically want to know if it's COVID or a cold or a flu. Just stay home, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
No one wants to get sick.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting to live through and to deal with. And
Yeah, I remember some tense meetings as a senior team trying to figure out what do we do and how do we do it and what's the right thing. And that was the thing, is like we'd come to the end of those meetings and it was sort of like we're not even sure we know what the right thing to do is.
I don't think there was one right answer, right?
Yeah.
You just did the best you could.
Right.
And there were times where employees were wearing masks, and some members would get really upset if an employee
Yep.
was wearing a mask. They'd yell at him. They'd cause a scene. And there were times where employees weren't wearing masks, and they'd yell at them.
And they'd
because
yell
they're
at 'em
not
for
wearing
that.
a mask.
Yeah.
And we'd put a plexiglass barrier up at our teller lines, and members would be upset because they couldn't hear, couldn't whatever, and some of them were upset when we took them down, and so it was a no-win situation all the way
Yeah.
around. But
Yeah, it really was.
I am proud of how quickly the team responded, and we got people home and working from home, and we'd always, we've had some employees work distant, remote for a long time, but it really accelerated our ability to have people work from home and work remote, and probably even expanded that further than what it would be right now had
Yeah.
we not gone through that. So that's a silver lining in COVID. I think.
Yeah. One of the things that almost every business leader has to do, and a lot of them even have written plans for this, is like how to deal with a crisis, right? And if you were going to give somebody some advice on here's how you lead an organization through a crisis, whether it's COVID or some natural disaster or whatever it is, what are the fundamental, the like bedrock concepts that you would want them to follow?
I would say don't overreact, stay calm. That will instill more confidence in the team than anything. I am proud, years before, the credit union had prepped for what was bird flu or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so credit union was prepared when there were shortages of N95 masks. We had N95 masks we had stockpiles of them, from years ago. So we were prepared that way. So do what you can to prepare, but then be calm, don't overreact. Recognize that you might make a decision that you have to change later, and don't be afraid to make decisions, then change it when you need to.
Yeah, don't be too stubborn about what you decide. Yeah. What was like during the last couple of years, and we're kind of, at least in Idaho, we're sort of out of this COVID thing now.
Yeah.
But when we were right in the midst of it, like when you were going to bed at night, like what was the thing you were thinking about? Like, man, I'm worried about X.
To be honest, when we closed our branches, what kept me up at night was we didn't know how long that was going to last. And there's certain jobs that we can do from home, and there's certain jobs that you just can't, right? And so we had this group of employees that we have on payroll that really couldn't do their jobs, so we give them some other things to do in the meantime to kind of get them through, but there's not enough to keep them busy for months on end.
Yeah.
And so what kept me up at night was thinking of those employees and their families, and how long is this going to last, and at what point do we have to make a decision of layoffs or not? And thankfully, we never got there. We were able to open our branches back up and keep everyone in their jobs and keep everyone employed and keep the income coming. The other thing, right at the start, there were so many unknowns, and we went back to the drawing board. We took our budget that we just barely passed, and we completely rewrote it and revised it. and we revised it downward, right? Because we thought loans would dry up. We thought that income would shrink. And so we started buttoning the hatches and preparing for what could be. And that made me a little nervous as well, because you never know how you're going to weather that storm. Thankfully, in Idaho, things were fairly normal, and with the stimulus funds, people actually got more money than they had more money in their pockets than what they were making pre-COVID, right? And so I know a lot of families that actually had excess money during that time frame. They had more money than they were used to, and so we saw loan growth or loan demand remain really strong. What we did see is interchange decreased. Credit card transactions decreased. That affects some of the income streams. Some of the fee income shrank during that time when they have excess funds and they're not overdrawing accounts, they're not bouncing checks, things like that, which are good things. But it does diminish what we had in budget for those, which is normal operating levels. And so it was interesting to see how that all played out. And but those tough decisions, I don't know, it drives my wife nuts, because I'm one that when I go to bed, I hit the bed and I'm out. I don't worry. For something to keep me up at night, it has to be pretty significant. Even big decisions don't generally keep me up at night. Worrying about laying employees off, that kept me up at night.
I mean, these aren't just employees. Like, these are people you've known for years. These are friends. These are people.
I've been at the credit union 20 years, and there's employees that have been here longer than me that I've worked with for 20 years. So you know them, you know their families,
Right. We were really fortunate through that whole experience. A lot of people were not nearly as fortunate as we were. A lot of people did get to layoffs. A lot of people shut down businesses and really struggled through that.
Behind the scenes, we're part of a credit union association, and they were working with Governor Little and his team to ensure that when they classified businesses as those that could stay open and those that couldn't, they were making sure that we were on those lists that could stay open. Not just because of the employees, but because we needed to provide those financial services to our members, to help the communities run, to help the small businesses run, to help. So there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes with our elected officials, with the governor's office, with our lobbyists, trying to ensure that we could continue to serve the communities. And I think that helped. And then Idaho as a whole was pretty resilient through the pandemic, and so it worked out well. We experienced a lot of growth during the pandemic.
So I want to ask you about this. So over the 5 years that you've been CEO, you've doubled the size of the credit union. You've led that growth.
Not me alone.
No, certainly
but
not.
The credit
you
union
alone.
has grown. Right.
So, but you helped engineer a situation where we could do that. This is the secret everybody wants to know, right? This is the thing anybody listening, this is what they wanted to hear about, right? They wanted to hear about, how does one take an organization and double it? How'd you do it?
Well, I think it comes down to having a really good team. Like, I can't do it alone, and I've said all along, one of the things I'm most proud of is the senior leadership team that we have here at East Idaho Credit Union. I would put our leadership team up against any organization in the country, any size. And, we're $575 million in assets, still you would consider relatively small financial institution. But our team, the knowledge, the experience that our team has, I would put them up against multi-billion-dollar organizations. And I think we could go toe-to-toe with them. Our team is really sophisticated. Really,
I think that's the next season of Survivor is that what you just described.
Our team against someone else's team. Yeah. So I think that's key, having people that really can drive that growth, drive that success, drive that profitability. Another thing that I think was critical in that was a few years ago, I made the decision to split our ops and lending. They were under the same individual, and I split those up, and so now we have someone that's over ops and someone that's over lending, and brought in Ethan to the organization. Ethan had experience building commercial lending and some programs in other credit unions, and so that was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Right? We were already headed down the direction of commercial lending and business accounts and all that type of stuff, but to be able to bring someone in that knew it and to build a team around that knowledge just poured gasoline on the fire. And so we took our commercial lending from 0 to 100 miles an hour,
Right.
like overnight.
Yep.
And that really helped. We revamped the indirect lending program and put some good parameters in place, some good tracking in place to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails. Because what you see a lot of financial institutions do is they get into indirect lending, but they don't monitor it really well up front. They monitor it as delinquencies happen, which are usually 12 to 18 months after you make a loan. Well, by then you have 12 to 18 months worth of loans on the books that you're reacting to. So you get in, and then delinquency starts to increase, and everyone gets scared, so you pull out or you change things, and then it takes a while for that to all settle down, and so you're out for a year, two. Then you get back in, then you get out, and that just creates disruption. And so having the right tools in place around that indirect program, we went from $3 million a month in indirect lending. Last month we were $34 million.
Wow.
And for people who don't know what indirect lending is, what that term means, like when you go to a car dealership to purchase a car and they hook you up with their like finance guy, he's using us, or he's using some financial organization to help you fund that car. So that's what Dan's talking about with an indirect program.
Yeah. So we not partner, but we work with the dealerships and provide financing for those vehicles, autos, RVs, all that type of stuff. And so having that program in place and having it set up correctly so that we can monitor on a monthly basis and understand the credit quality of that portfolio and make tweaks along the way before it gets to the delinquent stage, that's been critical. And now we're just in this opportunity of growth as a whole. And so now we kind of went back and have worked on remodeling branches, building new branches that in situations where a remodel didn't make sense. You know, some of our buildings were at a point where it just didn't even make sense to remodel them, right?
Yeah.
And so
it only made sense to just knock it down.
Just be done with it. And so we went through, and the buildings that were still in good condition that we could remodel, we remodeled, brought in the same brand elements throughout. And now we're actually starting to add new branches. And Pocatello was the first one that we added. This year we're scheduled to open one in Meridian. Well, it won't be this year, but we'll start construction this year in Meridian and in Driggs. And who knows from there? The sky's the limit. We just have this growing demand for the services that we provide, and so we're willing to go in and provide those services to members in the communities where we're not currently participating. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the $1 million question here. $64,000 question, I think, is the proper term. But inflation, so we're at $1 million now. But so we're in a market that's fairly crowded, right? There's a lot of financial institutions. In fact, I was driving through Rexburg the other day. I didn't count, but if there were a dozen in my 5-minute drive, I wouldn't be shocked. Not all of them grow the way East Idaho Credit Union is growing. Why does East Idaho Credit Union grow, and why is there such demand for us and for our products and services?
Yeah. So we're the 6th largest credit union in the state right now. End of first quarter, if you compare the growth that credit unions had in the first quarter of 2022, there was only one credit union that grew more asset size than us.
Yeah.
And we're number 6 in size. So that means we outperformed 4 of them that are larger than us in growth, right? I think a lot of it comes down to relationships, both within our branches and our teams, right? So the way our branch teams know our members is an important piece.
Yeah.
how our call center team knows the members that call in and use that channel. And then our relationships even on the indirect market. You know, we've seen huge shift in indirect from $3 million to $34 million a month.
Crazy.
And it really comes down to relationships and our relationships with our dealer reps, our underwriters, our funders with those dealers. Commercial lending, it comes down to relationships. Mortgage lending, relationships. So it's all about relationships and how we take care of people.
Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a pie in the sky one, but I want to ask you, you've got a number of years left in your career.
At least 15.
At least 15. By the time you hang it up, what do you want to have said that you've done?
Man, I hope that at the end, when I retire, I'm still able to say that we're committed to the small communities in Idaho. You know, that's important to me. That's our roots. That's where we got our start. Forever, the credit union has been anchored in Arco and Chalice and Salmon and St. Anthony and Rexburg and Idaho Falls and Shelley. And so I want to make sure that we honor that tradition, that's not lost as we grow. It doesn't mean that we can't grow and expand into the Treasure Valley, to the Teton Valley, wherever our path takes us. You know, it could even be another state. It could be anywhere. The growth is unlimited, but we won't lose those roots that we have. And then I really hope that people will think that and say of me that I've been able to help people along the way, that we've built things versus tear things down. You know, you can grow in lots of different ways, but I think if we can build people, build communities as we grow, that's a much better way.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask you one last question. Maybe, we'll see. So for our audience, which is largely made up of business owners, if you were going to give them your top 2 or 3 things that you've got to do to make sure that your business is successful, what are those things? What would you tell them?
You have to know your CFO really well and have a really good relationship with them.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
That CFO position is critical. Like there's almost all positions are critical, but that CFO controls so much of what happens in the organization, what gets tracked, what gets, the ebbs and flows of things. That CFO position is an important one, and you need to be able to work in tandem with them.
Yeah.
Sometimes small businesses, the CEO is the CFO.
Sure, yeah.
And so you know them pretty well.
Yeah. Better than you'd like, yeah.
But as that business grows and you bring someone on, man, I've seen some small businesses that really suffer because either there's a disconnect between the leader and the CFO, or because of mismanagement of funds. You put too much trust in, there's not enough checks and balances, and some money goes missing, and it can set a small business back a long time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Is that your first hire then? As you're growing your organization, you go from 1 to 2? When do you bring in the financial person?
I don't know, because I've never had that experience. Right? I got to build a credit union out of $250 million in assets. And, I think we had 115 employees and 30,000 members. So I didn't get to go through that.
At least at some point, when there's actual money to manage, you need the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and even the strategic piece of that.
Yeah.
Being able to, I think beyond just the finance and the accounting piece of a CFO, they really have to be strategic, because if they're that intimately involved with the finance and the accounting and the whatever, and they're not strategic, that can be a mess. That can be a miss, right?
Yeah.
And so finding the right individual that's good with the financial side, but can think strategically and work with people,
Yeah.
You know,
Well, you just described our current CFO,
Yeah.
right? Like Jeff Vogt, he could probably do any job in the organization, really. I mean, not only is he a financial genius, but he can speak intelligently to.
I've even
with
seen
me-
him cook on the barbecue grill at one of your member appreciation
the
days,
guy,
right?
he's the Swiss Army knife, right? He can do anything. He'll sit down and be like, "Hey, I had this idea about marketing." And usually, when a CFO walks up and says, "Hey, I've got an idea for marketing,"
They're
you're
trying
just
to
like,
cut
"Oh
budget."
my gosh, this is going to be," or it's the worst idea you've ever heard in your life. And he gets it, right? He gets it across the whole organization too. Yeah, he's an impressive guy.
Well, I spoke earlier about Chris Cardwell, CFO, and Brad was the CEO when Chris was hired. Chris was amazing. I love that guy. A great mentor for me. But I was nervous when Chris left because I was CEO when Chris retired and had to find a replacement for him. And I was really nervous about that hire. Really, really nervous about that hire. Because it is so critical and it can change the direction of an organization. And man, we hit it out of the park when we found Jeff.
Yeah, good find.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that's advice number 1. What else?
Follow your gut. There's been some times that my gut told me something and I didn't listen to it to try and give someone a chance or appease something, and that's turned out to bite me in the long run.
Yeah.
And so follow your gut, even though it might be a hard decision. Follow your gut.
Yeah. Sometimes even when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Even when like the data doesn't necessarily support
Yeah.
what you're deciding to do.
Trust your instincts. Trust your experience. Follow your gut. And
Yeah.
you'll be fine. It's important to get information from others.
Yeah.
It's not bad that in fact, it's great that they have a different viewpoint or differing view. That's important. But ultimately, you have to make some decisions and trust your experience.
Yeah.
You're the leader for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. I've watched this happen a few times where we'll be in a senior team meeting and we'll talk about this topic and we'll all fight over it because we all have varying levels of experience in different things and viewpoints and upbringings, and we all have our own ideas about how something should work. And sometimes we'll even as a group, without Dan, we'll land on this is what we should do. Then Dan will be like, no, that's not. That's not it. We're gonna do this other thing, and usually I'm like, oh, I can't believe we didn't think of that. That's actually pretty solid. So
Sometimes the ideas are a little too Texas.
there's no such thing as too Texas. Yeah, no such thing. Okay, your last piece of advice you would give to somebody.
Just have fun. I think that's one of the biggest things. One of the biggest changes in our culture was having fun. I remember when I was first hired, I had to wear a tie, button-up shirt and a tie every day, and the ladies had to wear nylons. I can't imagine putting a pair of nylons on every day.
Zach's face over here.
Yeah, me neither.
Are you speaking from experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a picture.
There's a picture out there.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we get that on the.
That's right.
Yeah.
podcast. Zach in nylon.
I think I deleted it.
Oh no, it still exists.
Was it when you were doing a fundraiser?
No, that was just my own choosing.
Just the weekend.
Oh.
It was the Christmas party.
Christmas party that we had.
Yeah. I remember you showing up to that Christmas party thinking, "Oh my heavens, what has he done?"
Listen, our team was Big Bang Theory. We all dressed up as a person, and I was gone that day. So there's 5 of us, and the day I showed up, they said, "You're Penny." So,
He drew the short straw.
I guess.
I think that was the Christmas party that I wore my Lakers jersey underneath my shirt,
Which
and I got some booze.
which
right?
was the only thing that made me feel better about what I was wearing.
No, I think it is important to note when they said "you're Penny," he just said that's fine.
He embraced it,
He
yeah.
just like, oh, let's do it. Yeah.
I'm not
I
gonna go
already have
halfway.
the clothes for it. Right.
But anyway,
Ready.
I remember that decision of. So we came from this culture of, the traditional financial institutions,
Yeah.
uptight, straight-laced, suit and tie.
I've never seen a tie in that building before.
And And we started transitioning to no ties, to polos. And then I remember when we made the decision to go to jeans. Because once in a while, we'd in the past, we'd held this contest where if you paid $5 to whatever charity we were raising
You could wear
money
jeans.
for, you could wear jeans for the day, right?
That's awesome.
So that happened once in a blue moon. And now we wear jeans every single day.
Right.
That transition, when we made that decision, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of angst about it. But ultimately, we made the decision to move forward and have a relaxed, more comfortable culture. And I think our members appreciate it.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you get out into some of those rural communities like Arco and Chalice and Salmon.
Yeah, they
St.
rode their
Anthony.
horse there,
And,
right? Yeah.
and they walk in and they're kicking mud off their boots and you're sitting in a suit and tie,
I
right?
thought you were
They-
going to say something different. But yeah.
I could have, but they really appreciate feeling more like they can connect with you when,
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
dressed more like them. So that the dress code change was a big piece, and then just having fun. No matter what leader we've had, over the last 10 years or so, we've had fun, and now. My thing is Nerf guns. I love
Yeah.
Nerf guns.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we were hosting a credit union a week or two ago. They came to look at our core system. And before they left, I said, you can't leave East Idaho Credit Union without having a Nerf gun war. So I gave them my gun that shoots 8 rounds a second, 8
Yeah.
of those bullets, little round Nerf bullets
Yeah.
a second.
Yep.
And I told him how to go ambush Edward in our IT team, because Edward is always
Yeah,
shooting
he's
the new
prepared.
employee.
usually the ambush.
Yeah, he usually gets
Yeah.
the new employee. So I prepped them, and they went and got Edward. But they did it from pretty close range, and they shot him in the eye.
Oh, man.
So they were really nervous, right? And they were checking back
Sorry,
with
Edward.
me. Next couple of days, we're checking back with me. Is Edward all right? Is Edward all right? This is just part of who we are.
Well, I remember my interview here. I come into this conference room with, it seemed like 38 people in it, interview in front of the whole crowd. And I'm in the middle of giving some answer, and I'm sure it was Edward busted through the door. And
He's the one that organizes it for us, yeah.
but it was like 6 guys all bust through the door with Nerf guns and just let me have it. And I ended up under the table, like with a notebook over my face. I did get shot in the eye, and I had to do the rest of my interview with like a red eye. Yeah.
What did you think of that experience as a candidate?
I'm trying to even remember now. Like I said before, I'm aging at a rate of 7 years per year at the moment. But I did, when I walked into the building and I'd talked to you on the phone a number of times before I ever showed up. And
I tried to prep you a little bit.
a
right?
little, yeah. In fact, Franny called me, but I don't know if you know this, but Franny called me maybe the day before I left Texas to come up here for the interview. And she goes, "Hey, just don't wear a tie, okay? Don't wear a tie."
They'll cut it off.
Yeah, she's like, you won't leave with it if you bring one in. And but you and I had spoken on the phone a number of times. I'd talked to, I think, Marcy and a couple of other people on the phone before I ever got to Idaho. And that interview lasted like 8 hours or something. It was a long interview, very thorough. It was fun though. It was cool. Everybody was really nice, and I do remember feeling like there's something kind of different about this place. I don't know what different means. I don't know what that is yet, but I do remember feeling like it was different, and I did remember feeling like when I answered questions, people weren't just sitting there like checking a box. They were actually genuinely interested in what I was talking about. And then to get ambushed was I don't remember how I felt. I remember just thinking like being under the table, bullets flying, and thinking, this is crazy.
Yeah. I think that's a good example of the importance we put on having the right people,
Yeah.
right fit.
Yeah.
And to us, we'll go some time with a vacant position until we find the right fit.
Yeah.
Because that's more important than anything.
Yeah.
And honestly, for me, in that bigger panel interview, it's seeing how you interact. I know how you interact with me.
Right.
We've already had conversations.
Right.
It's seeing how you interact with a teller or a back office employee. That sometimes people look down on them and only direct their responses to the CEO or the EVP or someone. And so seeing how that fit works within our organization. And then if you we've had employee or candidates that we'll ask them ahead of time what happens if a Nerf gun war breaks out, and they'll, oh yeah, that'd be fine, and they're in that situation, right? And someone busts in and they shoot them, and they come up and they're just mad.
Oh, interesting.
And guess what? They don't work for us.
Yeah,
so
sure. Yeah.
you know, it's. I think that's an important piece of how we determine a cultural fit.
I remember, I think it was maybe our first phone conversation. You asked me a question. I don't remember exactly word for word, but it was basically, if you've got a deadline and you're working like crazy to get something done, and somebody busts in your office and shoots you with a Nerf gun, how are you going to react? How do you feel about that? And I don't actually remember my answer, but I remember going to talk to my wife later and being like, could you believe this weird question this guy
I think you told me that you'd pull a Nerf gun out and shoot it back or something.
sounds right,
Or
yeah.
that you would go out and join in for a minute and then get back to work.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I might tell him, like, hey, I got you now. You have to help me finish this.
You know, it's
Something like
interesting
that.
because in these interviews, we talk a lot about our culture and a lot about the organization. And I'm assuming that everyone does because, you know, it's part of the interview process. But the interesting thing for me is when we hire these senior level team members and they come in and they start working for us and they've been here for a couple months, they have this aha moment where these guys weren't just saying things about their culture. Like, they really live this. They really believe it. And they come back and they're like, you really meant what you said. And you guys really do this.
Sure.
Like, it's a shock because I think everyone talks about it, but not all of them truly live it.
Well, I
I have a great interview story about this same position. So I went in for the panel interview, whatever, and stepped away as they all discussed afterwards. And the plan was to go to dinner afterwards. So everyone went to dinner. And when they got there, they were like, did anyone text Zach? So I'm sitting there.
You were the one interviewing.
I was the one
and they were
being
taking you to
interviewed,
dinner, but they
and
forgot
they
to take
forgot
you?
to take me to dinner.
That's great.
We had another one similar to this. So
good.
we were interviewing for CIO, Chief Information, or
Yeah.
I think at the time it was a VP of IT position. And we'd interviewed a couple candidates, and one of them that we interviewed was Bob Hale. And I think we told him that we were meeting at Johnny Carino's, and we were all at Olive Garden. and so we're waiting for Bob, and Bob's not there. And so we started getting nervous, and pretty soon Bob had texted, I can't remember who,
Somebody,
someone,
yeah.
and figured out that we were at a different restaurant. And
That'd have been so stressful.
And he came and he joined us, and I remember we sat and talked for hours, and we were just laughing at Olive Garden, just having a good time. We'd been there way past close, and that's when I knew that
First
the fit
people
was,
to ever do that at Olive Garden. Yeah.
That's when I knew the fit was right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Another candidate that we'd interviewed for that same position when Bob was there, we actually left the interview thinking that's the candidate. You know, experience, the interview was great. We went to dinner, and that individual only focused on a certain subset of people and didn't hold a conversation with the rest of the group. And it was a short dinner, and people were gone. And then we turned around and interviewed Bob, had a good interview.
Right.
Went to dinner and stayed for hours.
Yeah.
And knew that he was the right
He's just
fit.
so fun and engaging.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting. You know, I think it's really, really easy to sacrifice a good fit for somebody with the technical skill that you're after. Like, it's really, really easy to make that choice. And I've watched it happen, but it never plays well long term. It never goes well for you. I worked at a company once where the CEO was the final interview for every single candidate.
Wow.
This was like a $1.6 billion company.
How many employees?
About 1,600.
Wow.
All he did was interview.
Well,
all day
it
long,
it
every
took
day.
a long time to get on his schedule. If you had somebody that you wanted to bring in, and it was like a month before he could interview, it got painful after a while. He actually eventually said, okay, anybody from the executive team can do it. But he held on to that for so long, mostly because he understood that every single person has a net impact on your culture, for good or ill. And he wanted to make sure that they were right. He wasn't interviewing them for any kind of like, can they do the job?
Yeah.
It was just, can I look at you for 8 hours a day and be okay with that, right? Ultimately, we spend more time with each other than we do like with our families.
Yeah.
True.
And so being able to work with people is really, really important. People that you like. Like, I have a pretty strict, like, no jerk policy because life's just too short to spend your time working with people you just don't like.
Nerf guns
Don't
and
like
being
you.
shot in the eye are all right.
That's fine.
But you can't be a jerk.
That's right. Yeah. You can only take so much, right? Well, Dan, any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave with our audience?
Man, just be yourself. Go out and work hard. I think that's the thing that I learned early on. Even I remember the first job I ever had was mowing lawns. I started mowing my grandpa's lawn, and then he lined me up with the neighbor, and then pretty soon I had 3. And it was my grandpa taught me and my mom taught me, it's work hard, do a good job, do a little extra. So don't just mow the lawn. If you see a weed, pull the weed out. You know, do something a little extra, go above and beyond. And that served me well mowing lawns. And I worked in grocery for a while, and if I started out as a bag boy, and as I did a good job, then I get promoted into produce or dairy or wherever. And so if you'll just go do a good job, learn your job first. Don't immediately go in and want to be the CEO, but go in and learn your job, do it really well, and then learn something else. Go above and beyond and learn something else, and take care of people. Treat them like you'd want your mom to be treated. And you'll be just fine.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today on DRGN SLYR. Again, our guest was Dan Thurman, the CEO of East Idaho Credit Union. We will see you next time. Okay, so before we get back into this, I know you're huge. What are you doing?
And they all came.
You're a huge LeBron James fan.
Yeah.
How did this happen to you? What happened in your childhood to make you this way?
LeBron James. So when I first started watching NBA basketball, LeBron was new. He was young.
Okay. So this would have been like 2004?
I don't remember.
Something like that?
Somewhere in there.
Okay.
And I think it was Kobe Bryant was all the rage and real cocky, real whatever, and I didn't like that. And so I picked LeBron because he was the new, young, humble kid, right? Well, somewhat humble.
Yeah,
every
very,
NBA player,
very humble.
Every
Yeah.
NBA player has to have a certain amount of confidence and pride, right? But yeah, things have changed for him over the years. So.
Sure. But you've stayed true.
Yeah, I'm pretty loyal. So Cleveland to Miami, back to Cleveland.
So how many LeBron jerseys do you own?
One.
Just the one? Just the Lakers one?
I'm too cheap. They're expensive. So I've only bought one. It was when he went to the Lakers.
What about?
And I hate the Lakers. That was the worst movie could have made. I hate the Lakers.
That's some dedication.
But I'm loyal, so now I'm a Laker fan.
Can you really say that you're a Lakers fan?
He's
No.
like, I'm
a
Laker
LeBron fan.
You're a LeBron fan. I feel like basketball is one of the only sports where you're more of a fan of the player than you are of the team, except for Zach with the Jazz.
That's some loyalty right there.
That's dedication.
How do you
That's
feel
rough.
about Rudy?
I'm a little sad, but we also fleeced
Yeah.
the Timberwolves with what we got for Rudy.
Yeah.
I didn't even
good
hear what
trade.
happened. What happened?
We traded Rudy Gobert.
4?
5 first-round picks. 5. And then
Like
their
6 players.
their first-round pick last year, and 4 other role players.
Wow, 5
Fleeced.
first rounders for how old is Rudy? He's got to be
30.
30. Yeah,
30
that's
years old.
pretty. They'll be able to build their whole franchise off that pick
Yeah,
if they don't mess it up.
which we do. We have a history of it.
But don't you have a new
New coach.
New coach.
New coach.
Got a brand new coach as well. And as soon as
who's
Kevin,
the owner now?
Ryan Smith, the Qualtrics guy.
Yeah.
So I know Ryan Smith personally.
Of course you do.
I do.
Bragged about that.
I know. I didn't brag about it. It's just true.
name drop.
Okay.
Yeah, no big deal.
I've had lunch with Ryan before, right?
Yeah.
I've got his cell phone number.
Yeah, sure.
I don't have his cell phone number.
I had lunch with Mike Pence too.
Oh, how was Mike?
No,
How was that?
He was at the GAC a couple.
Oh, okay. At the
I didn't sit next to him. I do have a picture next to him.
Mike Pence picture. Yeah.
Yeah, selfie.
It's like a selfie from across the room.
No, I was.
Cross them in.
I was there. Now I got
Always
Let's see it. Let's see it.
Now I got to defend myself.
I can't wait to see this
Andrea's
picture.
gonna be like, that was photoshopped in.
See if I can find it.
I will say I do know Ryan, but I don't really care for him either. Right? We're just two different kind of guys. You know what I mean? He's probably my age.
Isn't Dwayne Wade a part owner as well?
Yep, which is super
Oh,
weird.
in the Jazz?
Yeah.
You know him as
I don't know
well.
that. Yeah.
You friends?
Dwayne and I, we go way back.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just partying in Miami.
Spell his name.
I would rather not.
If you don't know, no one gets it right.
What is it? How do you spell his name?
W
D-W
Y
Y-A-N-E.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
Dwayne.
Dwayne. I mean, I guess that's phonetic, sort of. Okay. Having trouble finding that picture, huh, Dan?
Yeah.
Like maybe it didn't happen.
No, I'll find it here. I'm on Amazon Photos now.
Okay.
So I think it's off my phone and uploaded here.
Okay. What's your biggest like celebrity experience?
Too many to count. Oh,
Too many to count.
Well, she's from California.
this is true.
So you
I've actually
just-
had quite a bit of celebrity
Okay.
encounters.
What's the best one?
Shoot.
See, there I am. Well, I'm
Where
not
are
there.
you? You're not
I'm
in that
taking the picture.
You're taking the picture.
Yeah. Well, so here's our former VP of marketing.
I thought you said you were in the picture.
Well, I
not
didn't- I
taking the
didn't-
picture.
He's not even smiling for your picture. He
Anybody could
doesn't
have
even
taken
know
that
you're
picture.
in the room.
Oh yeah, we had a great conversation. I can't talk to him and Actually, I just shook
you
his
say,
hand.
hey, Mike,
I
can I
shook
get a
his hand.
picture?
is all.
Bring your selfie stick.
He moved pretty. The Secret Service kept him moving.
I'm sure they
fast,
don't
yeah.
let him sit around for very
Makes
long.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a picture of him, like from like back, like looking at like Bigfoot a little bit.
I was like 2 or 3 rows back from. Yeah. that was
Okay,
fun.
best celebrity experience.
Best, I don't know.
Okay, a celebrity experience.
Do you remember Shark Boy and Lava Girl?
No.
Yes.
Yes, totally.
Shark
what are
Boy
those?
would see him at the gas station all the time. He went to like my competitor high
Do
school.
you know what they're talking about?
Well, Shark Boy eventually ended up in Twilight,
Yeah,
right?
Twilight.
I've never seen it.
Oh my goodness.
Taylor Lautner, that's his name.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I know who that guy is. Yeah.
Are you friends with him?
Is he Shark Boy?
Yeah.
Why is he Shark Boy?
It's a role he played in a movie.
Oh, what movie?
Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
Girl? You're just too old to
I-
understand.
I don't even know what to say. I'm speechless.
It's okay.
Okay.
Gonna see if I could find the John Gruden photo. You let me wear his Super Bowl ring.
That's
He took
pretty
it
cool.
off.
Oh,
Let me
that's
wear his
that is
cool.
cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Saw
That's not
Andre
bad.
Ethier at Walmart. He was on the
Who's that?
Dodgers.
Oh, okay.
My mom had like the biggest crush on him. So it was
He's the ball boy.
awesome.
ball boy. Yeah.
Ball boy.
Ball boy.
Okay, I think my absolute best celebrity like experience. I'm on a plane. I can't remember where I'm flying from, but I'm going to Salt Lake City. Okay, and
Real Housewives of Salt Lake City.
no, this guy sits down next to me, and I'm a friendly person, so I'm just talking to him, right? I'm just some small talk, and I was like, oh, what do you do for a living, right? Are you traveling for business or pleasure? He's like, oh, it's some business. I'm like, oh, what do you do? And he goes, oh, I'm a singer, an actor. And I was like, oh, okay. Have I seen you in anything before? And he's like, oh, yeah, probably. I think you probably have. It was Donny Osmond.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't recognize him at all. I couldn't tell who he was.
Was he offended by?
I don't think so.
Why couldn't you tell who he was? Too much plastic surgery?
I just didn't. Look, I didn't grow up with Donny Osmond. That was like really my parents' generation. I know him from like Mulan, right? That Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Like I knew him from that movie. But I didn't like know him super well, and he looks older in real life.
He goes to church in the same building as my brother-in-law.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyway, he didn't seem that irritated, but you could tell there was
I hate to
a
call
lot
you
of
out
that.
here and you tell me to stop, but
Okay.
is that really your best celebrity experience?
I do have a better one.
Good point.
Is
Good
it the
point.
drinking? Yeah.
I do have a better one, but I shouldn't share it.
Okay.
I've met Mark Cuban twice. I've told you this story. Okay.
I don't remember.
He doesn't.
I better not tell this story. Yeah. It's fine. Okay, I'm going to tell it. Okay. So
They made me do it. This will be his excuse. They made me do it.
I'm from the Dallas, Texas area, right? And so I'm in high school. Mark Cuban has just bought the Mavericks, and he's just like man about town, right? He's young. He's ridiculously wealthy. He's just living it up. And so we have like a prom night date at Reunion Tower. Yeah, you've heard this story. At Reunion Tower in Dallas, right? So if you're from Dallas, it's that big building that has like the ball on the top. The ball on the top is a restaurant, okay? And it's cool, actually. Like that ball spins like every hour or something. It makes a complete revolution. It's a cool place. And big windows. Get to see the whole skyline. It's great. So anyway, Mark Cuban is in there having it. He's partying, okay? He's partying, and it's a lot of fun. And my group of like 17, 18-year-old kids is over at the table, and he starts going around. There's a woman with him with like a high heel shoe, and he's filled the shoe with like wine, and he's taking it around to different tables, asking people to drink wine from the shoe. So that's the first time I met Mark Cuban.
How did it taste?
A little sweaty, yeah.
Gross.
You would do anything for a celebrity.
I mean, when I was 17, yeah. But that was the first time I met Mark Cuban. Maybe on the next episode, I'll tell you about the second time I met him.
Stay tuned for part 2.
That's right.